Welcome to the Labs Fancast. I'm Fro.
And I'm Celes.
And you're tuning in to another edition of our 2018 Spring Season in Review, where we're talking about the shows that came out in the Spring 2018 season that we loved and liked and sometimes hated a bit. And if you are tuning into this on our YouTube channel, hopefully you'll be part of the playlist of the episodes we upload, because this time around we decided to do pairings of episodes and break things up for you guys so you don't have to sit through what would otherwise be probably a 5 to 6 hour long video. And in this episode we're going to be dealing with Hinamatsuri and Legends of the Galactic Heroes. What's the subtitle again, Celeste?
Neue These.
Thank you so much. And before we get to the synopses, again, if you are tuning into the show for the first time or want to give us any, or are a returning listener and want to give us any feedback, please contact us at lapsedfancast@gmail.com. Just email us your thoughts and feelings, or feel free to comment down on our YouTube page or Mixcloud page. And make sure to like and subscribe and share this video with your friends, please, so that more and more people get to hear us talk about anime and whatnot. And with that, Celeste, do you have any thoughts before we get started on Hinamatsuri?
No, let's get right into it.
Awesome. All right. So, Hinamatsuri is a story that starts with Hina, a teenage girl gifted with tremendous telekinetic powers, literally dropping into the home of up-and-coming Yakuza member Nita. After briefly terrorizing him with her abilities and essentially strong-arming the gangster into buying her clothes and food, Hina decides to stay with Nita, who reluctantly essentially adopts the girl after she helps him take out a rival gang and assist with some other Yakuza-related duties. That being said, any notions of a totally harmonious cohabitation between the two go out the window almost immediately, as Hinamatsuri is a tale of pretenses and expectations being upended in comedic fashion. Hina's otherworldly aloof demeanor, laziness, and blunt desire for immediate pleasure like food and video games clashes repeatedly with Nita's meticulously constructed attempts at marrying his Yakuza work and his meticulously clean bachelor lifestyle. Not that this is a problem unique to Nita, as we find out when more psychic-powered girls, classmates, gangsters, and other people about town meet and try to deal with Hina over the course of the story, while Nita struggles to keep their story straight and Hina's powers from going out of control. That being said, I would be remiss to say Hinamatsuri is solely a story about Hina and Nita's misadventures, as it is truly an ensemble story. In particular, Best Girl Anzu, one of the other telekinetic girls, and Hitomi, one of Hina's classmates, are standouts who become the focus for several of the show's storylines and episodes. Though not necessarily focused on one big narrative plot, Hinamatsuri manages to cover a surprising amount of insightful and emotional ground in its 12-episode run. A manga to anime adaptation brought to you by the folks from Studio Feel, who are behind Tsukigakure, Oshete Galko-chan, and kind of a bunch of mediocre shows about cute girls doing cute things, but also apparently this island show that's a big deal for the summer season.
It'll be a disaster. It looks awful. I don't know why anybody wants to watch it.
We'll see what happens. Anyway, Hinamatsuri is many people's surprise hit of the spring season. Might as well. And with that, I will turn things over to Celeste for her thoughts on the show, just to get us started with the conversation.
Oh Lord, is this show good? Hinamatsuri is great. It shows some like really heartfelt and just like deep in your stomach punching moments of endearing family. Nothing this season quite hit on the themes of family like Hinamatsuri. And this show, like, in general, covers a wide range of very serious and topics with a degree of depth you don't generally find in a show like this. It tackles class issues, it tackles family issues, it tackles relationships at school to a certain degree, what it means to work as a child to some degree, although not with the same level of sincerity and seriousness that it tackles class and family, but it's still an issue that Hinamatsuri wants to tackle. I found this show currently at 10 of 12 to be just utterly endearing. Bro, what did you think?
I agree with everything. There's not even a moment for me to cut in and be like, no, I think differently. No, the only thing I would also say is the show is about parenting in a really, not an abstract way, but not in an immediately obvious way. Because there's basically a prevalent theme throughout the show of parents failing at basic parenting skills and recognition. It's a show predicated on misunderstandings that aren't just funny from a typical kind of comedy in Japanese anime misunderstanding sense from a boilerplate standpoint, but from just using this upending of pretenses to the nth degree to get characters into just absurdly ridiculous situations that you just can't help but laugh at, on top of all of the serious subject matter that's really heartfelt. To start with, I just want to say that Studio Feel absolutely kicked ass with the animation details. Everything just looks incredibly fluid and flowing right from the get-go. In particular, one of the things that's really an easy sell with this show are the action sequences that are peppered throughout the first 2 to 3 episodes of the series. It's just absolutely a treat to watch visually. And also the way that facial features and reactions are depicted in the show is phenomenal. It's just incredible how
it always lands.
It always lands. All the crazy faces the characters make always land. And
my personal standout, for facial expressions, is Hitomi's little tongue wag that she makes when she's
panicked.
No.
Yeah, no, it's Hitomi is a treasure trove of reactions and reaction gifs and everything. And also there's just particular ways in which characters move about on screen, little bits and pieces that are just a treat to watch and see that are it's the show, again, fluid is the best way to describe the animation. And the combination of the sound design and direction, composition, background art, everything is just killer. This is another show that I discovered because Crunchyroll uploaded a clip to its Twitter account not long after the second episode aired. In particular, Hina and Anzu's initial confrontation when Anzu appears to take Hina back is just incredible, from a comedy, action, visual presentation, shot design, just how everything is shown on screen. The dialogue is funny because Nita basically figures out a way to manipulate Hina into a confrontation with Anzu so that she's not taken away. It's without making sure to not wind up blowing up half the city also. And the way it's resolved is just so ham-fistedly simple, is really funny to me. And yeah, again, this show has an uproariously funny comedic sensibility. There really is nothing else to say. Just then, it's really, really funny. But also the emotional beats in the show are particularly resonant. Often they're used to just upend the sadness of the character or their frustration and in funny ways. But when they're actually really sincere, it's oh wow. And it never takes you out of your suspension of disbelief that goes into watching the show ever. So it's key to illustrating why the show is a success. And in particular, I want to talk about my favorite episode, which is episode 6, Nita Has a Dandy Dad. Basically, this 20-minute long episode, or 22-minute long, I don't know how long exactly it is my favorite episode of anime from this entire season. Because the first part of the episode, which deals with Nita taking Hina to visit his mother and his alcoholic younger sister to introduce to them, winds up being really funny because they're trying to like get their story straight, and Hina cooperates in a way that is technically right, but sounds like she's being taken hostage, and leads to some really funny misunderstandings. And it culminates in Nita just outwardly and confronting, like, no, I'm this is my daughter, which is cool.
It's such a heartfelt moment.
It's a great heartfelt moment and totally justified in the work they've put into the first 5 episodes. That I have to just say it's a compliment that the latter half of the episode is such an emotionally resonant tearjerker of an episode, to say that it completely blows it out of the water in terms of any kind of emotional resonance. And that's not to put down the first half of that episode. It's just to say, holy fucking shit. This show, which is supposed to be this slapstick comedy show, makes you really feel for a character who, being down on her luck, this episode deals with Anzu. The conceit is that we open up with Anzu, who, after her confrontation with Hina and finding out that she's unable to return home, had become essentially more or less adopted by this small community of homeless men on the outskirts of town, who had taken her in, one of whom had taken her in after finding out that she had been stealing in order to make a living, and being like, no, you can actually like figure out small little ways in order to get by, and I'll teach you. And so she did, and in doing so wound up not only picking up a way to make a living in this world, but in that episode she endears herself to the other men there, who are just like, what the fuck is going on with this girl coming to join us, kind of. But then she like sings this horrible song to all of them, and they're like it takes them back to like, you know, being a part of their actual families, and it's really sentimental and sweet. So she becomes part of this homeless enclave, and this is another episode where Hitomi comes and visits her and sees how she's living, and that's an interesting class comparison. But nothing beats this episode, because we open up this episode 6, with the information that the city is coming down on the homeless camp, and that they're going to essentially remove them from the park. And the way it's set up, just from probably a good decade of similar kinds of episodes being drilled into my head from like American cartoons and whatnot, is like, oh, this is probably the episode where like Anzu's going to learn something, and then is going to help rally enough people behind, help save the homeless camp, and that's going to be kind of like the return of status quo thing. And it's not that. It's not that at all. There's absolutely nothing that Anzu or anybody can really do to keep the homeless camp as it is. And so she, through I forgot the lady's name. Do you remember her name?
Utako.
Thank you.
Utako.
Through Utako.
I thought you were talking about the restaurant family.
Right. No, we'll worry about that. I was going to get to that. But through Utako, Anzu is placed in it with this family, this older couple, who run a noodle shop in town nearby the bar that Utako works at. And Anzu is very despondent about being separated from the homeless men that she had befriended and formed a community with. And it's heart-wrenching. It
really is. I had a complete breakdown.
I sobbed watching this episode.
When, watching Utako or Anzu, she's essentially being moved up a class, and seeing her react to all the new privileges that she gets, it's heartbreaking. It really is.
Because she cares so much about
even the little things, where she's starting to help out, and they tell her she's washing the chopsticks, and they're like, no, just throw those out. And she's like, wait, we can reuse them. We don't have to get rid of them. It's just like, it's the little things like that that just make this whole scene, and like, it just solidifies. Hanzu is an amazing character. She's by far the most humble compared to Hina, who's kind of a fucking asshole.
She's a totally entitled brat. That's the crux of the show.
It's night and day comparing Hina to Anzu.
And
Anzu's so thankful for everything.
Yeah, and the episode ends. There's no real kind of like necessarily positive resolution for the men as they leave. Like they're just like, we did our, like, it's like we made sure that Anzu's somewhere safe, and now we're gonna move on. And Anzu in the restaurant, in acknowledging that she has so much to be grateful for, that the episode ends on just an image of Anzu smiling and with tears streaming down her face. And it's really well done.
I can't say anything more than it really is like one of the best episodes of the season. I think Wotakoi 12 can give it a run for its money, but like as an episode of drama, nothing comes close.
Some of the, in order to keep myself from like fucking tearing up on this podcast, some of the other episodes that are really, really good that I want to mention are really there's this run pretty much from episode 1 all the way through episode 7 that's just phenomenal. But 5, 6, and 7 are really good. 5 deals with the school aspect that Celes brought up earlier, which is only touched upon in a couple episodes, but it's done well enough to where you can pretty much like be like satisfied with its usage in the story. But episode 5 deals with a couple of Hitomi or Hina and Hitomi's classmates kind of accidentally stumbling across Hitomi's secret life as a bartender, but in a really kind of crude and crass kind of misunderstanding kind of way. The two boys whose names I don't know if they even give. They're forgot.
They're not.
The two boys and Hitomi's long-standing, probably Yuri-esque fellow classmate all start to gain suspicion that Hitomi is working as an underage prostitute in this bar. Which, I mean, that's not, I mean, like, I understand, like, oh my god, it's a horrible premise for an episode, but you have to understand just how this show works. It's really
like,
soul.
Up to this point, like, it's been like a little snickering joke in the back that Hitomi is actually a bartender who's just like really good at it.
And so what's really funny is Hitomi's reactions to being inquired about it, because usually in these kinds of shows, it's like, oh, the character will have figured out a way to like prepare for being inquired about it, and Hitomi clearly has no idea how to handle like people being suspicious of it, and acts so suspiciously when being inquired that it's really funny.
Mm-hmm.
And then the resolution at the end where it's just like, well, let's all just pretend we didn't see this. It's also
just
really
like the homeroom teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's
the homeroom
just like,
teacher.
Like one of my favorite gags in this show is when the homeroom teacher first comes into the bar and is testing Hitomi's skills and is so blown out of the water by how good her drinks are
that he's willing to buy into the illusion.
Yeah. He's just like, no middle schooler could do this.
And then the other funny part of this episode is that there's no actual storyline basis beyond like Hina being friends.
Is this the episode where Hina runs for student council?
No, but that's the other one. So real quick, Hina essentially accompanying the trio that are actively trying to solve this thing while knowing full well what's going on, because she was there the first time Hitomi was in the bar and knows that she's a bartender.
She took Hitomi to the bar.
Yeah, it's really funny because she's just like, why am I here the whole time? And there's that's just it. That's the joke. That's all she's there for, is to say that and just be present for this. That's great. But yes, episode 7 is hilarious because it's the other episode that really uses the school setting to the fullest extent, in that in an attempt to try and get Hina to act more like a normal person and a normal high school girl, Nita essentially roundabout convinces Hina to try to get involved in something at school. And Hina, being a vainglorious, lazy, power-hungry, in a small sense, person who doesn't want to do anything unless they're the center of attention, kind of, is like, I'll just run for class president. And Nita's like, oh my god, I don't know. But he happens to enunciate these thoughts in front of his Yakuza boss and Yakuza sub boss, who are great because they have really no idea what kind of person Hina is, and they're both like, what are you doing? You should support your daughter and encourage her fully to pursue becoming soon body president. And Nita's like, I just don't know if she's going to be able to deliver a convincing speech, or I forget what it was that leads the conceit of the vice boss of the Yakuza gang they're in, being like, oh no, let's just get our lawyer to write it. which is in and of itself amazing. And then the comedic payoff is that Hina goes and reads the speech verbatim, including all of the physical mannerisms the lawyer had instructed her to do. And it's great because it's like, oh my god, she actually knows how to like sound competent. And then it's like, what's going on? And then it's like, huh? And then it's like, wait, that's strange, but everyone's kind of convinced it's a good idea. What the fuck? And then the resolution for that bit is really great because it also winds up being something that Hitomi has to deal with in the end. Oh, poor Hitomi.
Poor Hitomi.
Did you want to talk about the episode where Hitomi tries to figure out like what happens to Hitomi in episode 10?
Yeah, so like one of my favorite episodes of Hinamatsuri, granted I haven't seen the last two yet, but I really, towards the end of the show, Hitomi's mom is getting fed up with her late nights at the bar. Excuses worn thin. But she won't believe that Hitomi is working as a bartender. She thinks that her daughter is prostituting. Which is a strange thought to come to, but whatever. And so Hitomi leaves the family, buys the condo she buys is like insanely. Now, I want that condo.
Yeah, and the reason why she winds up with that condo is because Yutako, fully enmeshed at this point in the story as probably the worst person alive, which is strange given I just mentioned that she's the one who got Anzu placed with a family out of the kindness of her heart. She's great, but she's also somehow simultaneously a nice person and a horrible human being at the same time. She's the one who's like, no, you can move out. You'll be fine.
Move out. It's fine. All you need to do is pay 150,000 yen. It'll be great. And then you can live here. This will be your place. She like forces Hitomi into this contract, and so
Hitomi, part of the OP, by the way,
forces Hitomi to pay off this debt. Has to go and take up a bunch of jobs, and like essentially ends up working like 4 jobs at once. She ends up as like a businesswoman, as a middle schooler, and a bartender, and another businesswoman, and she's doing like animal mascot gigs and serving food at baseball games. She's just doing all of this work to make money to pay off this debt.
And also like dealing with
and
some,
she's
like,
just
coworker
she's perfect at it.
She's so perfect at it that she like enrages the rest of the other kind of like office workers at one of her temp jobs. And she's able to diffuse the situation in a really comedic and uplifting fashion too, which is nice.
And so she's like exhausted from all this work, which I think is like, it gives all of this like worth, because it really shows like how much all this work can wear on a person. Like there's only a certain amount that a person can feasibly do without some rest and relaxation. Like Hitomi is collapsing on the floor of her apartment and letting her food rot because she's just so tired. And so her scheme to get out of this is to invite her mother to her housewarming party, in hopes that her mother will essentially tell everyone about how she's a middle schooler and get her fired from all of her jobs. But her mother is just like, wow, you're so good at this. You should keep all these connections. And she tells all the people there that to just take care of Hitomi. And Hitomi is just like, no.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And all of this just because Hitomi as a character can't tell people no.
Yep. It's tough being a people pleaser like that. I relate to that in some sense. Oh, man. I mean, again, this also ties into one of the big overarching themes of the show, which is that adults can be totally useless. Totally useless. So, Hinamatsuri accomplishes, in my opinion, a great deal of character development throughout its 12 episode runs. There's a couple of different routes. There's overt character development in the form of Anzu and Nita, I want to say, experience the most change that's overt throughout the show. Although, if I was to do a continuum, it would be Anzu at the farthest end of most change, then Nita, then Hina does change. Like, that's, there's
an entire episode devoted to how Hina has changed.
Yeah, so that's an acknowledgement. Then, more towards the end of has not changed is Hitomi. And in the middle are some of the side characters and characters that are supposed to be more important for the long-range storytelling, because that kind of gets into some of the limitations of this series. If I do want to get into some of the criticisms, but before I do, is there anything else you wanted to add? Anything about the art or themes you wanted to discuss that were particularly resonant and thought were a plus?
The one thing that I keep coming back to, there's been a lot of shows this season which have tried to make a name for themselves visually. If I had to choose between Hinamatsuri and Megalobox as the future aesthetic of anime, I would choose Hinamatsuri every single day. Every single time. Hinamatsuri looks amazing. It's so pretty. It's fluid. It gets its point across so well. I don't give a fuck that it's CG.
I totally agree with you. I'll say this. For a show that is pretty goddamn funny, some of the comedic send-ups just didn't hit home. I know you haven't watched episode 11, but I found that the story in the first half, which I'd been hyped for because a lot of the folks that I had been following in the week-to-week discussions of the show were really excited that it was going to be adapted from the manga. I just thought it felt short. Like, I knew what they were going for in that episode, and maybe when you watch it, it'll be a lot different, but I felt that the premise they were going for in that episode had a pretty clear end goal with what was going to happen, and because it was a little predictable, I was hoping that the end product would be a lot more biting and a lot more funnier than it was. It just wasn't as funny as I thought it was going to be. And so the other thing is there are some interesting side characters that are only present throughout maybe one or two episodes, and I would have liked to see that a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen a lot more of the Yakuza stuff. There's not been a full-on article about this yet, but there's been enough wiki edits and comments made about this particular facet of the show that I do want to include in this recording, which is that the Yakuza-related content in Hinamatsuri, in terms of the chapters that were picked to be adapted, is a lot less than if you were to do a one-for-one kind of chapter per episode kind of thing.
That's because of the Yakuza on TV kind of stigma.
Yeah, there's still an existing stigma, which is interesting at this point in 2018. You think things might have changed, and I mean, I don't know. It's tough. Like, that is a big call, and I don't know what. It's so culturally divorced from what I would understand. But all I can say is that because of maybe some self-induced pressure not to depict too much of the Yakuza, we wound up with fewer Yakuza-oriented stories, or it might just be an interpretation of the chapters that were adapted and some of the adaptation decisions, such as Nita's burgeoning Yakuza tattoos being removed from the show, because in the manga he starts to have the shoulders being done. It's a cultural thing when you're Yakuza to have a giant back tattoo. That's a really rudimentary and simple explanation. I'm sorry if I pissed off anybody with that. But yeah, so that was part of the decision to just limit the Yakuza content. And so that's one of the limitations of the show, is that if you talk to people that have been reading the manga, and I think this can be the case for a lot of 12-episode adaptations, there might have been some better chapters to adapt. And so that's just unfortunate. There's apparently a chapter where it involves Hitomi and swearing that I've heard a lot of really good things about that wound up not being adapted, that a lot of people were hoping for. So, yeah, let's see here. And then there's a big problem with episode 9 and episode 12, which is they are the Mao episodes. So in the OP...
I disliked episode 9.
So,
it felt so out of place.
So in terms of trying to... This is the problem if, like... I understand setting up a show so that you can continue to do that show in the future. And I would love to get a second season of Hinamatsuri. Especially knowing that the show really only adapted content from the manga from like the first quarter of what's been published or something like that. It's ridiculous just how much more there's left for adaptation purposes. So episode 9 introduces us to Mao, who's brought to the island by oh man, why am I blowing
security chief
K. That's right, K.
Oh yeah, that's right, Ikuraga.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ikuraga K shows up to bring Hina back, but then she's like, I'm gonna need help. So unfortunately she summons Mao, who's another girl like Anzu and Hina, to help, but she sets the coordinates wrong and Mao gets dropped off on a deserted island, and we spend the entirety of episode 9 with Mao as she deals with being stranded and has
basically the plot of Castaway.
Basically the plot of Castaway, but instead of Wilson, we get a Anzu and a Mao, or Anzu and a Hina shaped coconut, which is great because Hina just says Gohan all the time, which is great. So it's like, yeah, everybody else knows, everybody that really knows Hina, which is funny because it's like, oh yeah, she's all about immediate pleasure. And then eventually she leaves the island. That's pretty much it. It's not, I mean, like, a lot of people wound up enjoying that episode, but I found it to be really like a nothing burger of an episode. And episode 12 deals with kind of where Mao heads immediately afterwards, and more or less deals with how she winds up in Japan, which is where the series would pick up on in the second season. But really, it's all episode 12 really does is that it brings back the rocker character from the episode where Hina gets kicked out and happens to join a street performing band. And it's a really funny send up of like martial arts culture in a sense. And that's about it for episode 12. It's not that great. It's a weird way to end the show, especially because the second half of episode 11 is actually really strong. And if you like the first part, then episode 11 is a really strong episode. I didn't, but I understand why somebody would. Just because it's really funny to see the predicament that Nita's put in episode 11, at least the first half. And so, yeah, so the other part of, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. So episode 11, the second half of it's actually really good. It's not that story I got mixed up. There's another really good story in episode 11. I'm not going to spoil for you, Celeste. So, but I'll just let everybody know that I didn't like the first half of it. Episode 12, the first half is a really good part to wrap up stuff to do with Hina, more or less. But the second half of episode 12 is Mao getting to Japan, more or less. And that one's just like it's a weird way to end the show. So for me, Hinamatsuri had this really wonderful run up until episodes 11 and 12, where half of each episode just didn't do that much for me. But ultimately, I wound up with a really positive evaluation of the show. And a couple of things, I guess. I really like the Aita dad, where people started like counting how many times essentially like the Japanese version of ouchie was being said by characters. Aita, Aita. Celeste, do you have any criticisms about the show?
My main number one criticism is that they set up the show with the kind of promise or like the conceit or that Hina has to use her powers a certain amount or else she'll go ballistic. They do that once. They let her go wild to help Nita with some Yakuza business. But after that, she seems to like use her powers very sparingly.
Yeah, that is also a really, really weird decision. Like, that episode was kind of that half
like,
of the episode was kind of bizarre. That's about it.
It's there's so much potential for such good comedy. I don't know why they didn't do anything with it. And I don't know if that was an adaptation decision or if that's like the source material or what was going on.
Yeah, my read on it was probably an early enough part of the source material, and then maybe there was some story that they chose to skip over adapting that like resolved that problem. Like, oh, it's only if Hina is full of energy that's gonna happen, or she's restless. So like if she like goes out and about and goes to school and goes and does stuff, she'll be fine. Something like that. But yeah, that's about it. I mean, I agree with that criticism too. It's bad. That episode and the Mao content is stuff I just don't care about. I know it's supposed to help set up the second season where a lot of shit happens, but it's not that helpful for just analyzing this season of the show. But thankfully, it's such a like, it's like 2 points of criticism and that's it. Because even when talking about like the OP and the ED for this show, it's great.
They're wonderful.
And the OP changes to reflect changes in the show too, especially Yutako becoming a less good person and being phased out of both the ED and OP, leaving the bar essentially all to Hitomi, which is thematically correct. Yeah.
Although I don't really have too many criticisms of this show. I find it humorous that Hina is the main character, but I essentially dislike her the most.
Yeah, I mean,
I like Hina. I like the scene she's in, but god damn is she an entitled bitch. I like every other character. I have something very positive to say. I think Anzu is great.
I mean, Hina
Homie is great. Nita's great. I like Utako more than I like Hina.
I mean, she tries. There's the one where Hina tries to celebrate Nita's promotion, and it sets up a hilarious gag that I don't really want to spoil because it's really good. It's one of the best gags of the series. Like, and Nita has such a Nita's voice actor deserves a raise. He's really good. He's really fucking good in the show. Actually, the whole show is just really good voice acting. Nobody's voices are. There's so much playfulness. Like the Yakuza characters are definitely like leaning into the whole like tough guy shtick, and then it's really funny hearing the characters that were tough like make Aita noises too. It's great. And gosh, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say about this show besides it being probably my favorite show of the season and definitely one of my favorite shows of the year. And I score it as an 8 out of 10. Oh, I know what I want to say. The show that this show actually feels like a very close cousin to the most for me is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, because Hina strikes me as almost like a perverted version, like a sexually perverted version, of course, but a perverse version of Kana. Where there's like
I can see that.
Yeah, and like there's like
I'd say Dragon Maid's better than the show though.
Yeah, I mean it's not a comparison. I just when folks are trying to describe the show, often the case was the descriptor was thrown about was like Mob Psycho 100 but with lollies, and it's like no, this is more like Maid Dragon but with psychics. And I really enjoy the show. It's a lot more like directly funny, and the sentimental moments have more to do with less direct nuclear family kinds of parts and components, and more to do with like making your own family Oh, that's actually a really bad way to put it. They're very similar in the family aspects they treat. And I also wanted to say, I don't know, Celeste, do you have any thoughts about the treatment of class issues in the show? Because that's one of the things I thought was really fucking cool about the show.
I think it handles it really well. You get to see, Nita being an upper member of the Yakuza is kind of rich and wealthy and gets to do whatever he wants. He lives in a high-rise apartment with a great view. And then you have Anzu living homeless for almost half the series. And you get to see a lot of people in between. I think it is a really good outlook on, Anzu being happy to make 700 yen a day.
And Hitomi just nearly fainting, oh my god, that's nothing compared to what I make. And
and then Hitomi makes 1,500 yen an hour. It's just well, there's a class disparity here.
I liked that even more so than Anzu and Hina's interactions, where Hina's just I'm bored. Where are your video games? She's so far removed, but Hitomi has some kind of context for what she's making, and more specifically, oh, that's very little for what Anzu's finding happiness in, which is really interesting.
I feel like they delve into the diminishing returns between classes really well too.
Yeah.
When Anzu moves up a class, when she gets to live with the restaurant family, she takes everything that everything is precious to her. She doesn't feel like she can just have all of these things. Before, she had to work her ass off for even a small portion of what she can take for granted here. She had to think about how long will her candle last. And in her new family, she can just turn the light on. And that's an amazing privilege to her. And whereas if you were to move from Anzu's new position to Hitomi's old position, I feel like there's you can see a lot of the diminishing returns there.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree 100%. And you can also see with Anzu, even when she succumbs to some moment of weakness, particularly episode 10, the latter half, where she takes money that she'd been given an allowance and is convinced by Sabu, who's one of Nita's Yakuza running buddies, who's more good-natured, but it turns out he's kind of a colossal moron too. Again, continuing the themes of adults who are shitty. And Anzu winds up losing all the money in betting and is really tempted to wind up injuring one of the horses with her powers in order to win at the end. And she's like, no, I can't do this. It's not right. And of course, Hitomi is along for the ride, because of course she is along for the ride for that episode, which is great. And she winds up just being like, you know what, I can just do something really special. And in almost a reversal of fortunes, gifts her newfound parents a relaxing shoulder massage and time spent with them, as a kind of gift that would be, class-wise more akin to the kinds of pleasures and so on and so forth that she would enjoy being homeless, which I thought was a really nice reversal and really nice moment. But we've talked about Hinamatsuri a ton, and I want to move on over to the other show we're going to talk about in this episode, which is the, what would you say, remake or re-update of the legendary Legends of the Galactic Heroes series?
That's right. It's a remake project for the 1988 OVA series Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Production IG's Legend of the Galactic Heroes Neue These. Like I said, it's a reboot, and it follows the plot almost unnervingly close, although it tends to rely on the original source material a little bit more closely than the OVA did. It's a story which follows two galactic powers, the Free Planet Alliance and the Empire, the Rudolph Dynasty Empire, facing off against one another in a battle of philosophical government styles. The armies are essentially led by master tacticians Reinhardt and young Wendy as they face off more and more in battle. Reinhardt is accompanied by his childhood friend Siegfried Kiri-Heiss, who is essentially his second in command, whereas young Wendy is more often than not accompanied by a group of people, but none so closely. Though as things progress, he will gain more close subordinates, such as Frederica, I think.
Yeah, Frederica.
Neue These is as a remake, covers the original 15 episodes of Legend of the Galactic Heroes.
Do you know the studio who made this particular adaptation?
Yep, it's Production IG.
Ah, and that's a studio with a crazy long resume of shows, so we don't have to bother with that.
Production IG are industry veterans from long ago.
What did you think about the? This is gonna be one.
Before we jump into conversation here, I'll just say that there's potential for spoilers of the original OVA run and obviously the adaptation, the remake Neue These. All right, bro, what did you think of the episodes that you watched?
So, as Celeste is alluding to, I have seen 7 episodes of Neue These, and I have seen absolutely nothing of the original OVA series because it is a daunting endeavor, and I have not ventured to do it yet, which is all the more worse because I really, really like this so far. I was
for what it's worth. Sorry to cut in. I'm just gonna comment. For what it's worth, I've seen the original run twice.
Why? I was kidding.
It's so good. Oh my lord.
I'm just kidding.
Legend of Galactic Heroes is one of the easiest 10 out of 10s to give. Period. End of story.
So, my understanding of the show, as of right now, episode 7, is that this is one of those crazy big epic war stories, the kinds that a lot of shonen anime and manga try to use it as an end game, but because of the conceit that it's just a perpetual war, and because this is space battles between these massive multiple planet organized militaries, that you can kind of get away with some cannon fodder and not necessarily having to establish everybody, but at the same time, unlike some shows, for example, the end game of Naruto or the end game of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, you don't have to rely on a lot of stuff that you hashed out early on to flesh out the story. You can do a lot with, at that point, you can do a lot with where you're at right now to really build on it instead of getting to this point and then trying to make something huge out of it, which is what those shows deal with. But again, we're talking about 2 different kinds of anime, really. What genre does this wind up falling under? It's not mecha, it's very much just a military style.
It is 100% a space opera.
Yeah, that's right, which I feel dumb for not. I should acknowledge that. Yes, as a giant space opera, it is pretty much quintessentially a giant space opera. There's nothing weird. There's no idle sideshows. There's no beach episode.
I think the original Legend of Galactic Heroes was kind of written, or is kind of a response to Uchusenken Yamato.
Oh, space battleship Yamato.
Yeah, very, very famous space opera from the 70s and 80s.
And does it have to do with that series delving into a bunch of other random things, or just that series really hit the nail on the head, and now we're gonna do something in that vein?
I would say that. So, from what I understand, I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, but from what I understand, Legend of the Galactic Heroes was a book series written around the time Uchusenken Yamato was released or was airing.
Okay.
So I think that the influence is there, though I haven't actually seen Uchu Senken Yamato. But Legend of Galactic Heroes takes all the things that show is trying to do in a genre convention, and it perfects it. You get this huge galaxy scale war that rages on for battle and battle and battle. And it uses that framework to really delve into these really deep philosophical topics, ranging from, what style of government will, how do governments rise and fall, and is fascism more capable than democracy on a large scale?
It's interesting. I think so far, 7 episodes in, it just has not gotten to that philosophical depth because it's doing the heavy lifting with.
Yeah, they're still like establishing the world building.
Yeah, and it's fine. It's something I can't comment on because I've gotten to that point, and I feel like with only 5 episodes left, I might not get to that point with this particular adaptation unless they start making movie OVAs later on. But hopefully by the time I get to the end of it, will be something where I'm like, I have to go check out the rest of this. I won't be satisfied unless I find out more about the story and the themes it wants to explore. So hopefully I'll get to that point. And so far, I think I'm going to get to that point. I have the show right now as a 7 just by way of its methodology of introducing the cast of characters and the ones that matter. It does so in a way that doesn't feel like it's wasting time, which I appreciate because my time is valuable. And in a giant war story, and this might just be my experience from those shonen and seinen manga and anime that try to get to this point as the end game, that you wind up getting a lot of time wasted on crap. And I don't really feel like this show has made so much use out of the plethora of characters and their motivations as of episode 7 that I'm like, yeah. And I know that a lot of this stuff can be built on by the introduction of more characters later on too. And so I would say that I really enjoy. I mean, I like the main duo, the opposing duo in the show, but man, I feel like I'm just getting started with a really good story, which is I think the point of the show. I would say that the most appealing theme so far is that both the main characters do not have that chosen one aspect about them. They both come from within their own respective worlds, relatively unheralded or there's not like high expectations for them from birth given their relative lower statuses. And the show has done a lot to establish just how much of the political games are going to be really important in this conflict. So
absolutely.
So
I will comment on that. Like the political aspect of this, like it becomes even more complicated when more factions enter the fray, because they allude to this third whelming power in the remake. Who is Fazan, and they're gonna play a huge part to play, like as things unfold. Which it just adds like a level of complexity to all of this. Fazan is a faction of bankers. They loan money and they use that to wedge control.
Oh, that's interesting. And we haven't even gotten to like the economics aspect yet, so I'm glad that actually plays a role. I would say, I think that maybe somebody who's a first-time watcher like me might come to the conclusion that some of the motivations seem a little quintessentially melodramatic, especially for the space Germans who, let's be honest, just by way of how they're depicted, even the ones that are trying to break free the most from the constraints of their very atypically fascist, classically fascist society like Reinhardt, there's only so much they can do at this point in the story, kind of. So a lot of it is just like this emotional like grounding of their motivations, but it's also just like it has to mirror the kind of like quintessential culture they're in. That's like, yeah, of course, in order to upend this crazy sorry, space not German, maybe more. I don't want to say space Nazis 'cause it feels really overt, but like to overt.
They're less like Third Reich fascist Germans, but they're more like Second Reich, World War One Kaisers.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The Holy Roman Empire style of Germany.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so, like, yeah, of course it has to matter. And of course, a lot of the stuff that's going on in the Free Planets Alliance at this point seems a little bit less space opera-y at this point. Although I feel like I can hear you laugh behind the screen at this point about that. So I know I'm dating myself. I've already given myself the expectation that not everything is as it seems, which is good. And we kind of briefly mentioned the world building. The world building for the show is rad, and I'm really fascinated by the history. They really put the effort into like saying, here's how things got to this point. And with that, I think I'll turn things over to you. Do you have any like this? I mean, hopefully at some point we will cover the original series. If there's anything you want to say about. I would start off obviously with this adaptation. Why? Actually, let me give you a good question for that. For other anime watchers who have watched the OVA series, what does this remake offer them? Why should they go check this out?
You should watch this remake because it follows the source material more closely than the original, and that includes context that you are missing if you only watch the original. There's an entire episode devoted exclusively to the backstory and upbringing of Yang, which is missing from the original.
And is the anime?
Like... Go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. And is the would you say that the animation style is enough of an upgrade to be a selling point in and of its own?
Yeah, I'd say it looks great. One of the limitations of the original OVA was that they had to spend a lot of their time on screen focusing on these abstract maps, which is fine for like walking you through the strategy. But it was very difficult for them to display these very large-scale fleet movements by actually showing the ships embroiled in large-scale laser battles and projectiles. You get a lot more of the fleet action on screen in this new CGI version.
Yeah, I would say if there's one thing is that while the CGI ship battles in space are thematically consistent, they're strategically sound, they're all justified by the characters explaining their motivations for why they're taking particular action, so on and so forth. They can be a little bit kind of boring, but that's, if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, I hope it's not enough of a negative to, dissuade you from continuing on with the series. I kind of felt like it was a really strong negative until I got to episode 6 and 7, in which case I was like, oh, cool. There's going to be action sequences aside from ship battles. Thank God. Because I was worried. If that was going to be the only way.
One thing I will immediately interject with here is that the hand-to-hand combat in the original OVA is way better than it is in this remake.
Okay.
Like, when... I'm trying to remember their names. They're really, famous characters. One...
Is it von Strumpf?
Yeah, it's...
Walter von Strumpf?
Yeah, Walter von Schenkopf. Yeah. That's who it is. Walter von Schenkopf and his crew, when they go and invade Easterlon Fortress, in the original, they're using battle axes and cutting into corpses.
Holy shit.
Very bloody, and it is not pretty. And they are very much so characters who will fuck your day up.
Wow.
In the remake, it's way toned down. They might be using a knife and a laser pistol.
Yeah, There's like
they're
one
not like
stabbing
in
scene, and that's
full
about
fucking.
it.
They're not in like full fucking battle armor.
Yeah. I will say that. Can I ask you something? So,
Yeah.
as I saw the essential, it's a from a battle strategy sense, it's basically a bit more of a high end Trojan horse strategy. Would you say for somebody who is like me, got into episode 7 and is like, okay, things are kind of going interesting and the action's getting a little bit better, but I really hope this isn't the high point. Would you say that it is the high point of strategy A within the 12 episodes of this remake, and B within the entirety of the original OVA series?
Within the remake, I'd say probably.
That's unfortunate.
Within the original, oh god, does it get so much better.
Okay, cool. That's good to look forward to.
In the original, there are a lot of clashes between Young and Reinhardt to come.
Okay.
And those are some of the hypest episodes. They're intense. Seeing Young go against Reinhardt, like, in episode 1 where they were both able to overcome like incredible odds.
Yes.
And in the end came into a
stalemate.
Sort of like a stalemate situation.
Yes.
That kind of tactical level is engaged as Young and Reinhardt move up the ranks. They get more power to fight each other with.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I guess another question I would have would be, is there anything... So you're coming into this as a fan of the original series.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything about the 12 episodes that serves as the particular like end point that you think maybe had been a bad choice in terms of like where they put their focus on? Was there anything pretty close to I guess where episode 12 ends and episode 15 the OVA where you would be like, maybe they could have skipped that story in place of something else?
I feel like if they had had 3 more episodes worth of time, they could have ended in a much better place.
Okay.
So here I'm going to talk about some spoilers. So they end on episode 15 of the original, which is right as they're about to have a large-scale battle, the Battle of Amlitzer, which is a really great battle between Reinhardt's fleet and Young's fleet, who have invaded the Empire's territory. Obviously, that doesn't work because the Free Planet Alliance is led by a bunch of idiots. And so they have to retreat to Amlitzer, and the Battle of Amlitzer is wonderful. It's a tactical, like the way they go through that battle in the original is one of the best battles in the original OVA. Not the best, but it's up there.
For sure.
They end right at the point where the Alliance is retreating to the Star Zone of Amlitzer. Why would they do that? I don't understand. It's such a bad... If they had gone to Amlitzer, I would have said that was the high point, not Iserlohn Fortress.
I see. Oh, that's a little disappointing. So I feel like it puts a hard cap on the ceiling for where this can be, which is, I mean, like, could you ever imagine somebody saying this adaptation would be a 10 out of 10 series?
No.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's like, I'm even on the
my
anime list. And
especially, like, the original OVA is listed as a single entry.
Right.
Considered as an entire package, it's a 10 out of 10. If you were to break that into 12 episode segments, there would be like 2 of those 12 episode segments that are 10 out of 10s.
I see.
The rest would range from 5 to 8.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, like...
So,
even like, sometimes you can wind up with seeing stuff on my anime list and being like, oh, why did that person make it a 10? And none of the main reviews are a 10 for this show. So I feel good. It's like, it's good to recognize a show that does something well, but understand that there's a firm limitation for what it's trying to do. And in this sense, this reboot of a classic series, you can probably understand what the goals are, as opposed to some other series, which is, like, for example, Hinamatsuri, is more about getting you to read the manga as it continues to unfurl. I think probably the goal with Legends of the Galactic Heroes Die Neue These is to either drum up enough support for like a continuation OVA series done in the same art style by Production IG, or get folks to go back and watch the old stuff by getting DVDs and so on and so forth. Which feels like a really downer way to end this episode. I mean, like, I feel like I enjoy this. It's gonna be one of the highest rated things I store, unless for whatever reason the last 5 episodes are just horrible, and I don't feel like there's anything to really waver my confidence on it. I have it as a tentative 7 out of 10. I'd recommend this for folks, especially for folks that have not watched the original OVA series. I think it's a wonderful introduction to the world of Legends of the Galactic Heroes. And what do you think, Celeste?
I thought it was really good. I gave Legend of the Galactic Heroes Die Neue These a 7 out of 10. I think it's very clear in establishing why it has worth as a remake, and that it's following the source material more closely and giving us a more complete version of the story.
And a dope-ass OP.
And a very good OP that honestly puts the OPs of the original OVA to shame.
It's like this really dramatic and melancholic piece of music set over just really decent introductory scenes cut interspliced with one another, showing you all of the cast of characters that are going to be important for this limited run of the remake. And I like it a lot.
I'm certainly not saying that every adaptation choice and they didn't nail everything perfectly. Reinhardt's upbringing and his backstory is kind of fumbled. Much better in the original OVA.
What was fumbled about it?
They were too adamant in trying to show that the nobles of the empire are snobbish assholes.
Yeah,
and they made it comically so. That was never the case in the original.
I see. Yeah, I mean again, I think I've been comically calling them the Space Germans this whole time. That's probably what's helped solidify that in your mind. But it's good to know. Okay, that's a thing the show probably just didn't do.
Reinhardt's like backstory as to where he gets his motivations, and Anna Rose, his sister, they're all handled much better in the original OVA. On the counter side of that, Yang is handled better in the remake. He gets an entire backstory that he didn't have. His character motivations are like more properly and methodically laid out.
Mm-hmm. Is anybody else treated better by this adaptation?
I think Shenkop might be treated better, because if I remember correctly, in the original OVA, they just kind of like, when they're introducing Shenkop, they're just kind of like a throwaway line. Are you sure you want to trust them? They're from the Empire. You don't know if they're going to betray you. This one, they go into like
detail.
They take the pains to like really establish like why Young might be uneasy about trusting them, and showing that they're not bad people. They just are hard to trust, or they're not quick to trust others, because they seem to be they don't seem to be trusted by others very much.
For sure.
So I think that's done better. The Battle of Iserloin Fortress is done better in the remake overall, even though I miss the
the violence,
the comically bloody axe to the face kind of style.
Awesome.
But tactically, it's done much better. There's like a real air of tension as they're moving from, through their kind of Trojan horse plan. That's not the original.
For sure.
Oberstein is, I don't know, I feel weird about Oberstein in the remake.
Do you feel like he's too robotic?
No, he's supposed to be that way. Well, Oberstein's kind of thing is he has he has a goal, but he can't do it himself. He has to rely on Reinhardt.
I see.
But they're like, the thing that bothers me about Oberstein in the remake is they make him too slimy.
Which is a theme with the Empire characters, except for Reinhardt. And I think it's done to make Reinhardt look exceptional, which is to show
Well, that's
like
kind of the point, because Reinhardt's the main character.
yeah.
Not Young, it's Reinhardt.
And so, yeah, the other thing I would say is about, just to tie things together as we end this episode, I thought it was really funny that two shows that have drastically different circumstances and stakes in Hinamatsuri and Legends of the Galactic Heroes both have parts of their stories that deal with class differences. I was like, oh, we should pair these shows together. It'd be really fun. I know how you felt about that.
No, it's fine. The only complaint I had with that is that the class differences in Legend of the Galactic Heroes are much more global scale than they are in Hinamatsuri.
Yes, for certain. But I feel like we can learn some really interesting stories or get some interesting stories out of it. And I feel like both these shows delivered, and both are recommended by the two of us. And with that, got anything else?
No, I've got nothing. I'm tapped out here.
Awesome. Well, if you are listening to this episode on the podcast, or episode of the podcast on YouTube, it's hopefully part of a playlist of our spring 2018 review. So hopefully just click on over to the next episode. Again, if you want to leave us any feedback, email us at lapsedfancast@gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll catch you in the next episode of the podcast. And with that, this is Fro signing out.
And this is Celeste saying goodbye.
Peace out.